Welcome to Low-Sal-Life. I'm Sarah. It's been a long time since I've done any videos, and I am also a little bit behind in emails. So I thought that I would answer one email today on the video, and maybe you can see a little bit of my thought process. So sometimes I get questions and I don't know the answers, but I can always do my own due diligence to see if I can find any information on it. So that's what happened with this one. Hello, I hope you are doing well. I'm suffering from psoriasis and would like to know if it is somehow related to salicylate. That's a really great question. I do know that a lot of people, including myself, my mother had eczema. I know eczema. A lot of people suffer with eczema, and I actually don't know anybody with psoriasis in the low-sal community that has it. So that's one reason I wanted to do this video, because if you have psoriasis and you're salicylate sensitive, please put in the comments or email me so that I can add that to it as a symptom for the About Salicylates page that we have. So what I'd like to say is, what I end up doing is I do research and I look up like salicylate, or I usually look up like psoriasis and aspirin. And so those will usually come up with a pretty solid bit of information, and then I can refine it a little bit more. One of the issues with this question is that there are a ton of different types of, or not a ton, but there's more than one type of psoriasis, so it wasn't specific. So I will answer this, and I have here two papers that talk about a particular type of psoriasis and how it was aspirin induced, and one of them actually talks about how it's induced by not only by drugs but also environmental and food issues. So we'll just look at that. We're going to keep it really short today, so we'll go with that. The nice thing about one nice thing about if you attempt to do a salicylate elimination diet to see if it affects your psoriasis, you might get close, but it might not like hit the nail on the head. So with a low-sal diet, you end up usually cutting out a whole bunch of processed foods. You cut out a lot of fragrances. You cut out a lot of the cosmetics and cleaners that end up, that may have other chemicals that might be contributing to your psoriasis. You know, a lot of things contribute to psoriasis, and it's hard. I've been with I have a lot of friends, and I've had partners that have had psoriasis, and it is not, it's terrible. So if you're in that boat, I'm sorry. I hope that you can get to the bottom of it. So there's a couple different types of psoriasis. The most common is psoriasis vulgaris, and that's the one that creates plaque psoriasis. It's very similar. So my husband has had both psoriasis and eczema, and when he was talking to his doctor, he was like, well, wait, I've already been diagnosed with psoriasis. Why are you diagnosing this with eczema? And his doctor kind of casually said, well, it kind of depends on the place. So psoriasis has a tendency to like be in the scalp, or like on elbows, or kind of more on like knees and sturdier skin, where eczema, it will be kind of more in like the folds. So you're talking the inside of the elbow. I've had it on my eyelids. I've had it on my inside my fingers, and I don't know if there's more to diagnosing the diagnosis, but that might be a good distinguishing factor for some. Okay, so that's plaque psoriasis, psoriasis vulgaris. I did find two studies that had generalized pustular psoriasis. So we'll call it GPP, and this one study was done this one here was more recent, 1990. This is a report of 13 cases, and the reason why this is an interesting study was because GPP is not usually found in children, and so they were particularly interested, and they had a research cohort of 13 kids, and out of them, they ended up finding out what their triggers were for psoriasis. So psoriasis, eczema, migraines, these are all chronic conditions, and there's usually a lot of things that go into it, right? So if you can figure out like what the triggers are, it's not that this one item causes the condition, it's that it's a trigger. So if you can figure out how to eliminate the triggers and manage them a little bit better, then you can manage your condition a lot better. So they followed these kids around for a long time, and they found out that certain kids had certain triggers. So out of one of the kids, 1 out of the 13, there's actually 12 reports here. I think maybe one kid dropped out, but 1 out of the 12 kids had aspirin as a GPP trigger. And they followed that child for 19 years, so into adulthood. And once they figured that out, they were in much better shape, eliminating that. And then there was also this other one. I brought this up with the birch pollen. Birch pollen has salicylates in it, and so I brought that up in a former video this springtime. This here is a study from 1964 with a kid that lived in Pennsylvania. So the study is called Birch Pollen and Aspirin Psoriasis, a study in salicylate hypersensitivity. This is an interesting case and is one of the earliest cases of somebody actually having aspirin sensitivity outside of just taking like an oral medication. So this study is about a kid who had a really bad time and almost died twice. So what ended up happening to him, it was the 60s, he was a kid, he was playing outside, he lived in Pennsylvania, he'd go and like climb trees and play outside and everything. And when he was in Pennsylvania for 2 springs, he lived also in Ohio, like during some other springs, so it was only the 2 for Pennsylvania that he ended up getting sick. He ended up with general pustular psoriasis on his hands and all over his body. He spent like 2 months in the hospital for his first trip, and I think his second trip was much shorter but also pretty severe. So what they ended up doing was, what they realized is that he was probably reacting to both touching birch trees and then also inhaling the pollen, and that was probably what was his outbreak for psoriasis. He never really had another time that he ended up with this, except for when he was in Pennsylvania. Unfortunately for him, it was really popular that when kids came with infections, he had like infections, bacterial infection in his skin and everything by the time he made it to the hospital, and fever, so they gave him aspirin, and then he ended up getting worse. And so what they ended up doing was putting him in a climate-controlled room that did not, basically like a bubble more or less, so that he could be shielded from the pollen and also from the temperature fluctuations. And they stopped giving him aspirin and he got way better, but they didn't know what actually triggered it. They didn't think that it had to do with pollen or the birch trees at that point. So he ended up leaving, went to Ohio, came back a different spring back to Pennsylvania, and then he, same month, ended up with the same situation. So they figured out that it was more than just the aspirin and like a normal case of psoriasis. So they ended up linking it up eventually with aspirin and with the pollen and birch trees. So it's kind of interesting, but I wanted to share both of those. Both of these articles, as usual, I have the citations in the description down below, and then I always make like a little blog article that talks about the significance of these 2 articles. So I think that's it for now. That is the end of everything I know about psoriasis and salicylates. Yes, it can cause general pustular psoriasis. I don't know if it causes psoriasis vulgaris. You guys, if you have that, you might know if that's a trigger for it. Leave in the comments below or email me, and then I can add it. I'm thinking about making like a little anecdotes place where people can say, oh yeah, I had this and low-sal diet helped tremendously. So that's all I got for today. See you guys later. Bye.